We're going to kind of continue what I was saying this morning, and it's more or less a part two of this morning. If you can remember this morning, we talked about the rich young ruler and how his riches he could not give up. It was too much for him. He could not follow Jesus because his priority was in his wealth, was in his riches. It was too much for him to give up, so he didn't. He became sorrowful because he knew he couldn't. And Jesus uses this as an example of how specifically money, but really how anything can cloud the thinking of a person to the point where they don't know what's important, where they don't know, maybe they do know, I should say, but they don't choose to accept and to follow what's actually important. Turn probably a page to chapter 19 of Luke. We're going to look at another side of this same dilemma, but with a different outcome. Luke 19, verse 1 through verse 10. Then Jesus entered and passed through Jericho, and behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus, which was the chief among the publicans, and he was rich. And he sought to see Jesus, who he was, and could not for the press, because he was a little of stature. And he ran before and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was to pass that way. And when Jesus came to that place, he looked up and saw him, and said unto him, Zacchaeus, make haste and come down, for today I must abide at thy house. And he made haste and came down and received him joyfully. And when they saw it, they all murmured, saying that he is gone to be guest with a man that is a sinner. And Zacchaeus stood and said unto the Lord, Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I have taken anything from any man by false accusation, I restore him fourfold. And Jesus said unto him, This day is salvation come to this house, for so much as he also is the son of Abraham, for the Son of Man is come to seek and to save that which was lost. I mentioned it earlier, but this morning we looked at a rich man who couldn't part with his wealth, but tonight we're going to be looking at a rich man who did part with his wealth as a result of him following Jesus. We see a stark contrast, an opposite here, in just the next chapter even. Verse 1, and Jesus entered and passed through Jericho. The city of Jericho has quite a history, quite extensive. The city was destroyed. Earlier in the Old Testament, Joshua 6, 20 through 24 says, So the people shouted when the priests blew with the trumpets, and it came to pass when the people heard the sound of the trumpet, and the people shouted with a great shout that the wall fell down flat, the wall of Jericho, so that the people went up into the city, every man straight before him, and they took the city. And they utterly destroyed all that was in the city, both man and woman, young and old, and ox and sheep and ass, with the edge of the sword. Verse 22, But Joshua had said unto the two men that had spied out the country, Go into the harlot's house, and bring out thence the woman, and all that she hath, as you swear unto her. And the young men that were spies went in, and brought out Rahab, and her father, and her mother, and her brethren, and all that she had. And they brought out all her kindred, and left them without the camp of Israel. And they burnt the city with fire, and all that was therein, only the silver and the gold, and the vessels of brass and of iron, they put into the treasury of the house of the Lord. Jericho destroyed. Joshua then cursed anyone who attempted to rebuild the city in Joshua 6, verse 26, which says, And Joshua adjured them at that time, saying, Cursed be the man before the Lord that riseth up and buildeth the city Jericho. He shall lay the foundation thereof in his firstborn, and in his youngest son shall he set up the gates of it. What that part is saying is at the cost of your firstborn and at the cost of your youngest, so your lastborn, if that's a term. At that two costs, then the city of Jericho can be built up. It was Joshua cursing anyone who attempted to rebuild the city of Jericho. 500 years later, a man by the name of Hiel, at the cost of his oldest and youngest son, as Joshua's curse required, the city was rebuilt. 1 Kings 16:31. In his days did Hiel the Bethelite build Jericho. He laid the foundation thereof, and Abiram his firstborn, and set up the gates thereof, and his youngest son, Segub, according to the word of the Lord, which he spake by Joshua the son of Nun. Then we see Jericho mentioned in the New Testament, and this Jericho was around a mile south of the original location. So Old Testament Jericho, after it was destroyed and rebuilt, this Jericho in the New Testament is just a mile south. It hasn't moved much. And today, modern Jericho includes both locations. The location of Old Testament Jericho, the location of the Jericho that's mentioned in our passage tonight in Luke 19. Modern day Jericho is both of those combined. It has apparently grown since then, since the New Testament was written. That's a little bit background for Jericho. This is where Jesus was going through. Jericho was a prosperous city. It was near the Dead Sea. Trying to get a location in our minds here. Jesus was going through it, and it was a common place to go to and fro Jerusalem. If you're coming out of Jerusalem, you're probably going through Jericho. If you're going to Jerusalem, you're probably going through Jericho. It was a popular spot. But come with me to verse 2 and 3. Zacchaeus is described here with 4 points. 1, he is the chief tax collector. That is what chief among the publicans means. He was the chief tax collector. And the way tax collectors made an income was they were essentially doing contract work for the Roman government. The Roman government said, we need tax collectors to collect these taxes for us, give to us what's due within our land. But with that came the privilege of taking what you wanted, what you could get away with. And that's what Zacchaeus was. He was giving to Rome what was Rome's, but he was also taking quite a lot from the people to sustain his own income. That was his income, was basically what he cheated people out of. So the more he cheated people out of, the more money he would have. That is what built his wealth. That is what point number 2 is. He was rich. Because of his high position, in a career that was already, you're kind of guaranteed a lot of money in this career, but he's the chief amongst this career. He's making lots of money, and he was abundantly supplied, as the Greek translates. Zacchaeus became rich or abundantly supplied through this really lucrative career. We also see that Zacchaeus is curious. He is curious. And he sought, verse 3, and he sought to see Jesus, who he was. I'm sure Zacchaeus had heard about Jesus. Jesus at this point was becoming more and more of a common name, a common person that people knew of, gaining popularity, maybe not always in a good sense among the Pharisees, but gaining popularity. And Zacchaeus was curious. The term he sought in the Greek is zeteo, meaning to seek in order to find. He wanted to find Jesus. He wanted to find him. He wanted to seek him out. Zacchaeus was trying to find Jesus amidst the large crowd. Little did Zacchaeus know that it was actually Jesus that was coming to the point he was finding Zacchaeus. Jesus was searching for Zacchaeus in this crowd. But we'll get to that later. And then point number 4, Zacchaeus was in fact short. I'm not going to burden you with my singing voice, but we all know the song of Zacchaeus was a wee little man, and a wee little man was he. That is exactly what he was. He was a wee little man. The average height of a Jewish man over near Jericho, at least now, I don't think they had very much height records back in the New Testament times, but at least now is 5'8". And for Zacchaeus to be much shorter than that, you can imagine that in your mind. He was a wee little man, a very short Jewish man. Verse 4, and he ran before and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was to pass that way. And I want us to pause on this. Being of smaller stature, being short, Zacchaeus does some critical thinking here. He's not able to see Jesus. He sees the crowd, and that's about it. He sees the backs of people, but not Jesus. And so Zacchaeus starts looking around. He starts looking, maybe there's an open point somewhere. He starts mapping out the path Jesus is taking along the road from Jericho. And he sees this tree in the distance, right along the path. It's a sycamore tree. And it's ahead of the crowd. He can get there before the rest of the crowd does if he runs. And if he climbs that, he might be able to see Jesus, to at least see Jesus, pass under that tree. And so, Zacchaeus, being curious, we continue to see this curiosity in the first part of this passage. We see Zacchaeus running out ahead. He ran before and climbed up into the sycamore tree to see him, waiting for Jesus to pass under, hoping his guest would pay off, that he could get a better view of Jesus when he came further down the path. He does some critical thinking here. He wants to see Jesus. Verse 5, and when Jesus came to that place being apparently the sycamore tree, he looked up and saw him and said unto him, Zacchaeus, make haste and come down, for today I must abide at thy house. There's some interesting wording going on here. Some interesting wording. He looked up and saw him and said unto him, Jesus continues his path right to the sycamore tree Zacchaeus is in, and he stops. He stops. He stops right at the sycamore tree that Zacchaeus is at. Maybe Zacchaeus himself stops. He's like, oh, he's right under me. I see him, but why is he stopping right under me? Maybe he starts freaking out. He's probably excited, for sure. And Jesus looks up right up at Zacchaeus and commands him to make haste and come down. Hurry down, Zacchaeus. He knows my name? That would be a surprise. Jesus then informs Zacchaeus that he will be staying at his house that very day. He uses the word must, encouraging this statement to be said with a tone of necessity. Jesus must stay at Zacchaeus' house. Why? These are questions we can be asking ourselves. How does Jesus know Zacchaeus? I'm sure that's what Zacchaeus was asking himself. How does he know my name? He's never seen me. I've never met this man. We see this thought continued in Zacchaeus' excitement in verse 6. And he made haste and came down, so he listens to Jesus and received him joyfully. Zacchaeus did as he was told and eagerly accepted Jesus into his house joyfully. This was much more than what Zacchaeus anticipated. Zacchaeus was hoping for even just a glimpse of Jesus, just to see who he was. He wanted to put a name to the face. And what Zacchaeus instead got was a lot more. He got a personal involvement with Jesus. And remember, this was more than he was to accomplish in verse 3. And he sought to see Jesus, who he was. That was kind of it. That was it in Zacchaeus' head. That's all he wanted. Zacchaeus is now finding out that this same Jesus had planned to stay at his house before he even met him. Jesus says to Zacchaeus, like this was his plan all along. I must stay at your place. I must stay at your house. Zacchaeus says, what? You must? My house? Jesus knew his name without any introduction. There was no, hey, Jesus, I'm Zacchaeus. No, it was Jesus saying, Zacchaeus, hasten and come down. It's interesting. Jesus, he knew that Zacchaeus had climbed a tree and went to that exact tree. That's the whole reason why Jesus stopped at that tree. He didn't just see a nice sycamore tree and he said, wow, that's a nice tree. Hey, it's Zacchaeus. No, he went to that tree because Zacchaeus was in that tree, and he called him down knowing Zacchaeus was in it. Jesus knew these things, all these exciting realizations that are flooding Zacchaeus at this point lead to this joyfulness that we see describing Zacchaeus in verse 6, this joyful receiving of Jesus into his home. And verse 7, this is a classic throughout Jesus' ministry. And when they saw it, they all murmured, saying that he was gone to be guest with a man that is a sinner. You can kind of say it in that tone, can't you? You can kind of see these people lifting up their noses and saying, Jesus isn't quite the righteous man if he's with sinners, right? If Jesus is including these sinners into his ministry, maybe his ministry isn't all that it's cooked up to be. He's with the wrong crowd, isn't he? That's what these people in the crowd are thinking. The crowd who had been following Jesus saw this whole exchange happen, and they start to judge Jesus for putting himself in close proximity with a sinner, with putting himself in the house of a sinner. How often do we see Jesus reaching the lost even when others judge and again raise their noses. How often do we see that really in the New Testament? Jesus doesn't care what people think about him. He does what his mission has always been. Which side do we find ourselves in? Maybe we avoid people that are spiritually lost. Or do we go to people who are spiritually lost? Which one are we? Do we avoid the lost, or do we go to the lost? Do we seek the lost? Do we share with the lost? It's a challenge. That's a difficult one. It can be awkward at times. But that same person, but with a different mindset. It's the same person with a different mindset. You see, Jesus didn't go to Zacchaeus in his house because Zacchaeus most likely had the nicest house and was the person in a high position within the government. Jesus didn't care about that. Jesus would have gone to his house if Zacchaeus lived in a hut. It just happened that Zacchaeus was wealthy. But no, Jesus went to Zacchaeus because he was lost. Zacchaeus was a sheep in need of a shepherd. He was. And that must be our approach with sharing Jesus as well. When we see the lost world as believers, we must be seeking those who are without a shepherd and introducing them to the shepherd, to our shepherd. We must be introducing people to God, to Jesus, to welcome them and to not be biased. Verses 8 through 9, and Zacchaeus stood and said unto the Lord, Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I have taken anything from any man by false accusation, I restore him fourfold. And Jesus said unto him, This day is salvation come to this house, for so much as he also is the son of Abraham. We don't know what all happened in Zacchaeus' house. We don't know the exchange that happened. We don't know what Jesus said. We don't know what Zacchaeus said. We don't know what they ate for dinner. Surely there was dinner involved. That's usually what happens when a guest is invited. At least in those times, in that culture, there's a meal provided. But one thing we do know is that whatever Jesus was saying to Zacchaeus caused an instant change within him. There's an instant change. This is where we start seeing the contrast between the young rich ruler and Zacchaeus. There was no change in the rich young ruler. Absolutely none. But there is in Zacchaeus. We do know Zacchaeus was a very wealthy man. For him to say that he is giving half of his goods to the poor, that's not just money. That's not just, well, let me throw a number out there. I have $500,000. I'm going to give $250 to the poor. No, Zacchaeus is talking about assets. He's talking about all that he owns. He's talking about land. He might have multiple houses, animals, yes, money, valuable items. He is giving all of what he owns to the poor, or half of what he owns to the poor, not just money. Everything, his assets, everything included with that. Zacchaeus was parting with his possessions. He was getting rid of it. Not only that, but Zacchaeus proceeds to promise that he will repay everyone he ever overtaxed for his own income, quadruple what he essentially stole from them. Think about it this way. Let's say Zacchaeus takes a quarter, each year he takes a quarter of your earnings. An earning per day was a denarius. That's about $50 nowadays, or translated into the American dollar. That's about $50. That's a day's wage. Let's say in a year, Zacchaeus taxes them a quarter of that. So 25% of that's gone. When Zacchaeus promises to quadruple that, to quadruple what he took, he's essentially giving those people a full year's worth back. If you took a quarter of a year's worth, you quadruple that, you get a full year's back. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money to be giving all at once to, we don't know how many people, but many people. He certainly overtaxed many people. And he's given them all back quadruple. I mean, we give 10% a tithe maybe, not quadruple of what we normally do or what we normally give. The point in that was giving more than what was required. Not begrudgingly, Zacchaeus didn't do that because the Lord made him, or the Lord tied his hands behind his back and said, this is the only way. No, Zacchaeus did this because he wanted to. This was the result of that instant change that I was talking about earlier. This was a result of choosing to follow Jesus. Not the result of keeping your wealth like the rich young ruler did. What was the result of that? Sorrow. That's what the result of keeping your wealth leads, is sorrow. No, giving everything away in order to follow Jesus in a worthy manner requires much more. An overflow of his heart. He simply had other priorities now than wealth and riches. Wealth and riches and taxing people out of their shoes was not his priority anymore. His priority was following Jesus. This is the exact opposite response from the rich young ruler. Verse 9, and Jesus said, this day is salvation come to this house, for so much, as he also was the son of Abraham. It was apparent to Jesus that Zacchaeus had fully embraced him as his Savior. He proclaims it. This change, this surrender to Jesus, he proclaims as salvation being in this household. This is the point of salvation for Zacchaeus. The fruit that followed was evident of such a conversion, not because Zacchaeus simply gave to the poor. That's not what it is. Again, earlier this morning, it's not about actions. It's not about following the law. It's not about giving to the poor. But because Zacchaeus' changed lifestyle evidenced his right relationship with God. That's what giving to the poor was from. Not from some law, but from following God and God alone, from Jesus alone. We see some parting words from Jesus, and I would say this is one of the most familiar, one of the most popular verses in Luke. Verse 10, for the Son of Man is come to seek and to save that which was lost. To seek and to save that which was lost. Jesus is still talking to Zacchaeus in this verse. Zacchaeus made this promise. Jesus responds to that with, well, this day of salvation has come to this house. And he's still talking to Zacchaeus. And what does Jesus say? He says, for the Son of Man, for I, Jesus, have come to seek and to save that which was lost. He uses Zacchaeus' conversion and the grumbling of the people as an opportunity to remind everyone of his mission to seek and to save the lost. To seek and to save the lost. That's the mission of Jesus while he was on earth. He came to seek the sheep that was lost, remember? The one sheep out of the 100, and he left the 99. He came to seek the lost. Remember what seek means? To find, to seek out, to search for. That is what Jesus is here for, was there for in Luke 19. What must Zacchaeus have thought of that? Maybe a moment for us to be with Zacchaeus in this moment. What must Zacchaeus have thought about this when he heard this? To seek and to save the lost. I was definitely lost. Maybe that encourages him to share with others, wouldn't it? I was lost. I had everything, but it just didn't make sense to keep it all and to deny Jesus. It didn't make sense to me because Jesus, whatever he said, convinced me otherwise. This was an encouragement to Zacchaeus. He says this in opposition of the crowd. The crowd thought this was a bad thing of what Jesus was doing, going into the house of a sinner. Maybe they were worried about Jesus' testimony. I doubt it. Maybe they were worried about being in contact with Jesus. If Jesus was with sinners and I'm with Jesus, that's as bad to the Pharisees, wouldn't it? Maybe they were worried about that. But Jesus says, that's nonsense. I'm not here to be with people that have got it all together for the righteous, and he's here for the lost, which may include those who claim to be righteous. They're lost as much as Zacchaeus was, but we see Jesus here being contradicting what the mob is saying. The same mob that was flocking after Jesus just a moment ago. Just a moment ago, they were all about following Jesus. They're all about probably asking him questions in this crowd that we see earlier in chapter 19. They were all about him until he did that one thing. Want to know why that was such a weird thing for them to experience? Because it had never been done before. The Pharisees never did that. The Pharisees never went into the house of some lost man or some man that was rejected by society. They stayed to their temples, their synagogues. They stayed in their circle because they wanted their image to be seen as perfect. They didn't want to be associated. Mind you, they also thought of Zacchaeus as a traitor. Zacchaeus was a Jewish tax collector for the Romans. They didn't like Zacchaeus. That's why they were so concerned that Jesus was going in there. They thought Zacchaeus was a traitor to his own countrymen. Zacchaeus was a Jewish tax collector for the Romans. Those things don't bode well. But when they saw Jesus going after Zacchaeus, they questioned that. They judged him for that. I'd like to challenge us tonight. I'd like to challenge us with a few simple things, but again, that are hard to practice in our lives. If we're to be following Christ's example, shouldn't our mission mirror what verse 10 of Luke 19 says? The Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost. Shouldn't we mirror that? We read it. We've read it a million times. Shouldn't we mirror that? We cannot save anyone. Certainly what I'm not saying. We cannot save anyone because that is due only through the work of the Holy Spirit. But shouldn't we be sharing the gospel? Not just to our friends, but to everyone we come into contact with. Both to the popular or the unpopular people. Both the kind and the mean. Both the peaceful and the violent. Should our declaration of the truth have any bias to its audience? Any bias? No, it shouldn't. We don't see that in Jesus' testimony, his life on earth. We see that Jesus shared with all and that no one was excluded. Jesus said what he said to everyone, and it was meant for everyone. I said it this morning. It was God's will that all be saved. There is no bias here with salvation. Shouldn't that be our goal, to be unbiased? I know it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to share with family, isn't it? And those are the people we're closest with. Our friends. For me, that's almost more hard. I don't want them judging me. But we have to share with them. Random strangers, sharing with them. I have a story. There was this man that I came across. Mary and I were at a library in Wisconsin. And this man, with his back turned to us, busying himself with a magazine, started talking. And he was talking to me, but he wasn't looking at me, so it was kind of hard to tell. But he was asking, do you go to Maranatha Baptist? We were in the college town at that point. And I said, yep, I sure do. Back still turned to me. He said, what do you think about Catholicism? I said, well, I think they are lost. I think they are after the wrong things. They don't have the right priorities. And he said, well, I ran away from the Catholics. I don't like Catholics. I didn't know why he asked the question to begin with. I continued to talk with him and to engage with him. He's an older man. At that point, he must have been in his 80s. Unsaved, I asked if he knew the Lord as a Savior. He said, no, I don't want to. I continued to proclaim truth and tell him what Jesus has done in my life and to share with him in that way. And it came to the point where eventually he just left. He didn't say thank you. He didn't say goodbye. That was it. That was my last time talking with this man, a complete stranger. And he was up there in age. He was probably near his 80s, and boy, I can assume he might not be here today. That was my only chance to talk with that one man about the gospel just one time. I had one shot. I don't know what came afterwards. I don't know if he's saved. I don't know if he's alive. I don't know if he's unsaved. I don't know anything. But I encourage us, those moments happen where we come across someone we only meet once, and we've got to make the most of it. We're here to share the gospel with the lost and to introduce them to the one who saves. And that's it. Make the most of the opportunities that the Lord gives you, and be unashamed. Be fearless in sharing. Don't care what the mob thinks. Jesus didn't, we shouldn't. Jesus didn't, so we shouldn't. Take some time to think about this. Just a few minutes. Mr. Matt, would you like to pray for us and close us out?